It's great to see you all. Thank you all for coming. And the most important thing is that this conference becomes something for you to benefit from. And so we certainly hope that you're going to learn. And we're trying to provide life-changing information. And so something that you will be able to take with you and move about your journey, higher consciousness, higher thought process about different issues that we're trying to solve in terms of a social justice perspective. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs to strive from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand, a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand flows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air bridge harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp. Cries she with silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. I'm sure y'all know where that comes from. The great Statue of Liberty that stands in the New York Harbor. When you are born or invited to live in the so-called greatest country in the universe, what causes dreams to become lived nightmares? Why so many people never experience the good life? What I mean by good life is dignified existence and self-fulfillment. Is there fairness and justice in the American way of life when it comes to economics for people of color?
No.
That's what we're going to talk about with our panel today. So our topic, finding justice in an economic system that proclaims financial opportunity for all. So to our panel, Richard Peacock, Amanda Rosa, Cleve Tinsley, Tornette Shaw, James T. Jones, and Darren Johnson. Their bio is in the program, obviously, so you want to read those. So we're going to get started, because this is going to be, this could be a weekend just talking about this. It was about, I had to dissect a few questions from my list of about 200. So we'll get started. Ready, panel?
Absolutely.
One more year, and the age of Obama will come to an end. We experienced that breakthrough moment when a black man was given the keys to all the doors to the White House, including the secret passage. The change we can believe in the chant of "Yes, we can" was supposed to make the lives of black and other people of color lives better. So what's the status? So your first question, or the first thing to analyze, how would you describe the current economic condition of people of color, especially blacks, in this country? And keep it brief. So who'd like to start? Darren?
Start. Unfortunately, statistics have shown that even under our first black president, our first real black president, thank you, Bill Clinton. Unfortunately, even under our first black president, that unemployment numbers are still higher for people of color. They're still higher for black people, and that includes for college graduates. I experienced that myself. Unfortunately, the numbers still show that we have higher unemployment, And it is certainly not due to lack of education, because the numbers also show, increased college graduation rates for people of color. And so the fact that we have so many college graduates, not that college is the only indicator of whether or not you should be employed, but the fact that we have these increased numbers of college graduates, but we still have high lack of employment, I think is reflective of a systemic problem.
Just to add to that, I think one of the hardest pills that black people have had to swallow in the age of Obama is that even though he is a black president and he's charismatic and he's talented in a lot of ways, we are still in a state of stagnation in some cases, and in other cases it has gotten worse. I've read studies and I've heard things on NPR, and I've read things in other mainstream papers that suggest that the wealth that black Americans have accumulated has been wiped out. An entire generation of wealth has been wiped out. Is that because of Obama? Not necessarily, but again, going back to what I said earlier, it did happen while he has been president.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so I mean, adding, I guess, what really just adding to what some of our panelists already said, I think, for me, I think is this question about economic justice and whether or not blacks or persons of color have really progressed. I think there exists a sort of paradox, right? At the same time, between 1995 and say 2013, we have seen everything else holding equal, income, education, and qualifications, black progress as it relates to sort of social access and social mobility. What happens is, a good way to think through this is sort of, sociologists thought about sociology of wealth and what that means. They talk about three things that's important, I think, and I brought this book specifically because Oliver and Shapiro did a great job of comparing black wealth and white wealth. If we really want to look at racial injustice as it relates to economics, it's important to monitor it by wealth and not necessarily by income, right? Because if you look at the Forbes list, the top income over the last 15 years, a lot of African Americans are on these lists. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams. But if you look at the same Forbes list that comes out in the year about the top 400 wealthiest persons in the world, rarely any African Americans are on there. And this speaks to not only the ability to create posterity, but how do you sustain this over time? And they give three examples of how this inequality has sort of been perpetuated in our society and what kind of stifles black and brown people. One, they talk about what they call sort of how blacks have sort of been cemented at the bottom of this sort of social stratification system. Since slavery and Jim Crow laws, there's been racialization of policy, which prohibits black from being able to sort of access sort of increased wealth over time. But even if we're talking about capitalism and its structure, there's also been laws that prohibited small black businesses from flourishing. So when combined with all these kind of factors, we see a couple of things. We just compare middle income, not middle class. About $14,000 is the gap between middle class income between blacks and whites, everything else being equal, education, income, and everything else. But if we look at wealth, meaning how much a middle class person, perceptive-wise, like if I have the same education, I'm $25,000 behind the average white person. Now, how this is significant is this. Our ability to really say that we're free in this country, in a free market, relates to our ability to be able to say no to authority structures, right? So if I can go into my office and say no to my job, to my boss, not worrying about how I'm going to survive, that talks about wealth rather than income. My income goes up and down. But wealth is where, I can tell everybody in this room, forget you, and walk away and not worry about how I'm going to live the next day. And so I think wealth is a great way to sort of look at inequality, because without doing so, we miss the boat. Because there are scholars out there now who talk about, it's not about race anymore, it's just about class. But those two things are sort of inseparable, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
So, anybody else?
Someone once said that it is the best of times and the worst of times. And when you look at African Americans' economic existence during the quote-unquote age of Obama, it is truly the best of times. We have more money at our disposal than we've ever had in the history of blacks being in America. Yet at the same time, we are giving away more money and not having it circulated within our community at a rate that is in many ways unconscionable. What we're talking about, and as a revolutionary nationalist with some social democratic leanings, it's very difficult to be able to deal with the idea of collectivism, which has basically gotten African Americans through some of the leanest times in our history, within a system that is so predicated upon individualism. How do we balance the idea of collectivism and exist within a capitalistic structure? Because even when we're able to recycle our money and to make a couple black folk, Michael Jordan, Bob Johnson, Oprah Winfrey, rich, not quite wealthy, but rich, what is their responsibility to the larger community? As capitalists, they have nothing. Coming from that arcing tradition of justice, they have every requirement. And unfortunately, within this land that we live, the latter holds no weight when compared with the former.
All right. The lives of black Americans are better than they were half a century ago. The humiliation of whites only signs are no longer on display. But let's not be too hasty forgetting the past. History guides our future. Knowing that capitalism is the dominant economic system in the world, let's talk a little bit about what made the United States powerful and rich. Let's talk about how slavery and the Jim Crow era contributed to the growth of capitalism in this country. Who'd like to start talking about that?
I would like to jump in real quick and sort of address your question. I don't know if African Americans are better off now than they were 50 years ago. The overt racism that we see as far as blatant whites-only signs, that may very well be gone. Yet at the same time, African American leaders during that period, yes, I'm calling on that vaunted Big Six, Martin Luther King, Roy Wilkins, and the rest of the gang, who made a very strategic error. In hindsight, it has to be looked at as an error. Whereas they put their tangible chips, meaning black businesses, the black dollar that was in many ways circulating within the community, at stake for an intangible first-class citizenship that was written on law books but was never really applied. Look at where we are now. During the 1960s, we had the vast majority of African American children being educated by African American school children, being given a curriculum that was at least in some way based upon their historical experience. And look at today's educational system, where African American males are in many ways running away from educational, as we put them, opportunities. But in many ways, they tapped into this reality that the current and contemporary educational system, the curriculum that is being offered, has absolutely, positively little to do with them surviving in the short term. It's predicated upon long term. And once again, when we look at the school to prison pipeline that we have going right now, Lord knows that once they get involved with that, once they get even a smudge, they are persona non grata in regards to a mainstream economic system.
I think something else to have somebody.
So I want to make sure that we are talking about what is slavery and Jim Crow contributing to the growth of capitalism. So let's make sure we address it.
And I feel like that, one of the important things that we need to know, that we need to remember, is that the first, I do believe, remember Kabir and Chris, I do believe it was the first 12 presidents of the United States were all slave owners. That many of the men that created, our Constitution that said all men are created equal were slaveholders. The people that created this country were slaveholders. Slavery is in the very foundation of this country's creation. And to pretend as if that's no longer a part of it, that somehow we got all of that out of it, is unrealistic. It is at the very heart of the minds of the men that created this country, and it is perpetuated. It still lives on. You cannot expect a system that was created under those circumstances to somehow just magically on its own, rid itself of that. It's unrealistic. What we're seeing today is what started back then. keeping slavery as long as it did. It took a war. It took the country literally having to go to war with itself for us to finally, and even that wasn't even directly the reason why slavery ended. And even then, slavery still continued in many different ways. So obviously, it should be obvious to anyone that yes, slavery is the reason why we are here, is the reason why we are doing the things that we do. Slavery has had long-lasting repercussions, and I do believe it was Dr. Joy DeGruy that wrote the book about post-traumatic slave syndrome. The fact that there are lingering effects that slavery, an institution that existed in this country alone for hundreds of years, the fact most of this country's history, the fact that would still have effects to this day. We can't expect a system such as antebellum slavery that ended only a couple centuries ago, less than that really. We can't expect that to have just been ended in 1865. That's the end. It doesn't have any effects anymore. No, obviously the effects are long-lasting. Psychologically, they can be seen, but more importantly, systemically, it can still be seen. That's why we still have black people, despite the fact that we are, in many ways, yes, and I will admit, we are doing better than, statistically, we might, in many ways, might be doing better than we ever have before. We still have, we still have gigantic problems. We have the school-to-prison pipeline. We have the prison industrial system. We still have these problems. We have the othering of race. We still have police brutality. We still have these things to deal with that we are still so far from having solid solutions to. So yes, slavery, Jim Crow, it's ingrained in our system. It's what our system's made.
I would like to speak to the indigenous, Native Mexican side of that, because there's definitely parts of this history that exist side by side. Now, I'm going to warn y'all, I'm not a scholar, and I'm definitely relearning my identity as a mixed race Mexican American, and I'm just now getting into things like Metzlan and Aztlan, learning about Maya Chicana, which means Mexican, anyone brown from Mexico, South America, talking about how, yes, this whole system was created this way. It was created on the genocide, oppression, killing, and enslavement of people who were not of European descent that came here. There's this definite correlation and connection there, and it does echo today. Today, the problems that face the brown people, the undocumented immigrants, it's a form of slavery that's happening right under our noses. They may or may not be paid for the work that they do because they are undocumented. That still happens today. They are working and dying, doing construction work, picking fields, you name it. These are dangerous jobs and dangerous conditions, and they are desperate for a better life because they may be fleeing poverty and violence that happens from where they are from, whether it's Mexico or South America, and that's definitely all connected to the capitalism that exists here in the United States because they create a demand for human trafficking. They create a demand for the drug wars. And it causes this suffering to trickle down to their nations where they may not have many rights. And that still exists today. And then going back to the past, you wanted to talk specifically about, slavery and Jim Crow.
Well, I want to know how is that slavery and Jim Crow? How did that contribute to the growth of capitalism?
I
want to give them some background information.
I'm not a scholar. Again, I'll repeat that over and over. I'm learning every day.
Well, we'll have some things you can tell us.
There were times in the past that I'm just now coming to light about, for example, it used to be in order to cross the border, like as recently as the 60s, starting from the 1800s, people coming from Mexico to come to America to work literally for the day, whether they were coming to watch children, wash houses, whatever it was they were doing because they were desperate to feed their families, they would have to be washed down with DDT or other harmful chemicals, literally, until one woman in the 60s stood up and said, no, we are not going to tolerate this anymore. We're not going to be stripped naked. And there's just so much history that's lost because we do live in this white supremacist capitalist society that erases these histories, and it's taking great effort of people of color to find these voices and find this history and bring it to the forefront so that way it's not forgotten and that we recognize it then and how it affects us now.
All right.
like 3 distinct links about this, right? So the whole modern capitalist system in the U.S. was part and parcel dependent upon slavery for it to sort of flourish. If you think about the 3 main sort of commoditized products, sugar, rice, and cotton, right? These are the things that this country was founded and built upon. The whole sort of shipping system of the U.S. South, which was the beginnings of the sort of modern period, was indicative of sort of how slavery was so important. But it wasn't just relegated to the South. I mean, the American North, those who were responsible for providing textiles and other products. So slavery had this other impact going on. But it goes beyond that. If you look at education, their trade with England. I mean, if you go to Harvard, you go to Brown, you go to Rice University campus, a lot of the things we see were built on the back of free labor of black and folks of color. Right? So if we're not for the fundamental sort of slavery, the modern capitalist U.S. society would not have flourished at all. And it, of course, extends over to Jamaica and other realms as well.
Right, yeah.
You know, and one of the things, I'd like to ask the audience a question. What is the first U.S. colony? Everyone says Jamestown, and that is wrong. No, it's Roanoke, also known as the Lost Colony. Roanoke did not make it. And one of the reasons Roanoke was abandoned was that there was no wealth that could be extracted, that they could figure out how to extract.
Yeah.
So Jamestown was in many ways a do-over in the development of the cash crops, sugar, tobacco, allowed and encouraged investors to further dump money and resources into the colonies. And we all know who was out there picking the cotton, the sugar cane, and what have you. So our contribution predates even the formation of this nation. There was not an America when Jamestown was founded. It was the flourishing of Jamestown that allowed other colonies to be created that eventually put the idea, and Americans hate for me to say this, put the idea in the treasonous, backstabbing minds of the American colonists that we don't need the British. They're the ones who broke the deal and they broke away. So you can't separate black labor from white survival on the North American continent. Lo and behold, we should never forget that during those lean moments when Native Americans had tired of white encroachment, there were a lot of people who didn't make it through the winter because they were eaten by their spouses. Just consider that for a moment. And then link up the fact that investors, the only lifeline that the colonists have, the only way they're able to convince these people to send more resources and more money is that we have these enslaved individuals. They're not slaves. They're enslaved, stolen Africans who are going to extract some wealth for you.
Daryl?
3 ways in which slavery continues in different names. 1, prison labor. We, of course, have an inordinate amount of black people in prison. And, of course, if the prisoners, we can pay them cheap or nothing to do work. 2, as, Amanda? As Amanda pointed out, the labor of immigrants. We exploit them, we bring them here. On one hand, we demonize them and say they're taking our jobs, but there's these jobs that Americans aren't doing that they're being paid crap to do, and they can't even support their families. And 3, of course, is the management of capitalism and globalization that, of course, even if we're not going to blatantly do it here in this country, we can have exploitation happen in other countries that don't have laws against, say, child labor. So child labor will happen in other countries in order to produce stuff that we will ingest here. Slavery continues. It's still as real as it ever was.
Oh, God, it's just hidden.
Richard?
Just to add to that, if I'm not mistaken, although slavery was abolished with the exception of prisoners, I think the 14th Amendment allows slavery to continue if you are a person who is a prisoner of the state.
Right. Which caused the convict leasing program to thrive.
And you get so arguably extended to the for-profit prison industry.
Well, yeah, so the entire industry in the South, in a lot of times, that's after slavery and during the Jim Crow period, the convict leasing program was probably the most advantageous to industry that they could have probably created at the time. So that's another area that during the Jim Crow era that took place that contributed to the growth of capitalism. All right, we're going to move on. So we're going to go from the past to the present. In this year's presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders dominates the conversation about income inequality, and along with many progressives seem to think this is the disease and racial inequality is a symptom. Fixing unemployment and increasing minimum wage will provide the systemic solution to the race problem. However, racial justice advocates don't agree. Systemic racism must be addressed independently and on its own terms. So the question to the panel, is there a dichotomy between racial justice and economic justice?
I bet you all thought I was just here for a pretty face, So when I think about that question, I think about the homeless population. That's what makes me think about that. Do we have any social workers in here? So, and I asked that question because I'll be graduating with my undergrad in social work. There's over 500,000, so they say, homeless in this country. 85% African American, Black, people of color, and it's due to addiction or substance abuse. So that's all lies. This is my personal interest because of who I am, and I'm a scholar. On my bio, they forgot to put something. They forgot to put PhD. I'm from the school of hard knocks, so that's where I have my PhD in. However, being once homeless, I didn't know, I found out what a flash drive was in 2009. So, and this is because I was on the streets. I was a crack addict for many, many years. So when I started learning about who I am when I came out of my addiction, I'm trying to read, I'm trying to learn, and I see the racial injustice. I see it when I was attending my GED classes, because guess who was sitting there? We were, and it was a brother that was teaching us at a homeless agency that there was no, you're gonna get this reward if you come and sit in this class. This man was turning out the highest rate of GED graduates that we had to go to the University of Houston and take these exams. They shut that program down. You getting these niggas too educated. You gotta stop that. So they shut the program down. The whole system is designed for us to stay at a level to where there will continue to always be racial injustice. They don't want things to be equal. It's not set up like that. It's not designed like that. Everybody's a scholar, honey. Whatever your area of interest is, you're a scholar. So get that out your head. You're a scholar. So that's right. So now you fast forward to now all the research I have done. Learn what a flash drive was, right? So I've done all this extensive research, even in Houston and nationally, going online nationally, but just in Houston, you know, they just had the homeless count, right? They just had the homeless count here in Houston. Anybody know about that? Okay, so they just did the homeless count. So on the data for, you go and do surveys when you're talking to a homeless individual. Now, mind you, with this, the separation of races, you know, I'm still one thing I want to try to find my nationality and get out the box, as your daughter said earlier. There was no box to check there for African Americans. But guess who we mostly interviewed and surveyed was African American, Blacks, people of color. You know, that was on there. Am I off topic? Kind of. Am I? Because, you know, I will get off and go way over here. I'm supposed to be over. But it's just how this system was designed. There was no person that helped design this system, me. It was all white people that designed it.
But I think you're giving us a good idea in terms
Yeah, so-
of perspective in terms of racial injustice.
Right. And
You know, that type of thing.
Well,
So,
I'm glad you can keep up with me.
yeah, so what we're needing is to see, is there really some distinction between the two, between the racial injustice and economic injustice?
I'm gonna let you talk.
I'm really-
Because I'm probably gonna talk. No. So there is, because the way it's set up, and homeless is where I do a lot of my advocacy. I sit on a lot of boards that help the homeless and active in it. So the way it's designed is we won't ever be able to try to close the barrier for racial because of the way it's set up with the homeless community. And there's a large portion of us that are not able to access services to help to get on your feet so you can become a more manageable person in society and try to go back to your community and help those in the community. So it's just, you know, it's not designed for us to close that gap. So
Yeah, I have a question that we're gonna dig deeper into homelessness too, so. Yeah, so, Cleve?
So, out of all the questions you submit, this is the one that really hit home to me because my partner and I live in Third Ward area, those of you here in Houston, and of course there's a large redevelopment going on in Third Ward. And we stay in an interesting area, right? There's a condo for $400,000 across from us, $1,500 rent. But we stay in an apartment complex that's connected to another one where mostly African Americans stay in my complex. Right behind us is mostly Latino, right? And it's interesting because they have contracts with these sort of towing companies, right? And it's interesting how it works. Over on the other side, the white side, right, you can park on the curb, park in there, it doesn't matter, no one's gonna come tow you. But these contractors with our apartment complex and the other ones, systematically throughout the day, come through the night intentionally trying to catch somebody who may park for 3 minutes and tow them, right? Now, my partner and I experienced this
I
personally
just
because...
had my car towed
I
yesterday.
know, right?
On Green's Point.
Right. But what happens is there's a reason why they target these two communities in Pacific, right? Because one, they know if they tow us, we probably can't get it out right away. We don't have $300 to get out right away. So they're gonna make more money in the capital system because they're gonna go. More often than not, sometimes they'll be repossessed because they just don't have the money to get it in time. And after 5 days, there's no guarantee you're gonna be at the same lot. So they move your stuff somewhere else. So there's a direct link to sort of economic justice and racial injustice because the truth of the matter is the white people ain't getting their stuff towed. In fact, they can leave it wherever.
Yeah.
But this economics is connected directly to how sort of policies and also corporations and smaller companies begin to enact policies to make sure that this inequality is continuing to be spread.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Darren?
Reason why we cannot separate racial equality from economic equality is simply the facts, the statistics. We just had Third Bank, large bank, they were sued for denying disproportionately to the black community housing. They were sued for that successfully. We have redlining, which keeps black people, even when their earning power increases, it keeps them in, specific neighborhoods, keeps them in, ghettos, if you want to put it that way. And so our social mobility, in fact, the social mobility of people of color, it's not just black people, it's people of color, the social mobility it's much more limited than for those of whites. I've been told over and over again in my life, when talking about ghettos, why don't black people just move out? Why don't they just move out of the ghetto? If they hate it so much, if it's so bad there, why don't they just move out? Not realizing that it's, not that simple. For some people, they can just get up and go, but for us, especially when you haven't grown up in poverty, that was never an option. And it's not like my dad didn't work. It's not like we just didn't have that option. We had to move within, poorer neighborhoods, and that's the reality for many people of color in this country. To separate them is to ignore the reality of what is happening and who is being affected.
Anybody else?
You want to?
Just piggyback on what he said, I think it was just very recently, even this year, that there was a redlining case that was settled in 2016. So how far away is 2016 from when we were emancipated? So to answer your question, and also some people argue that the charter school system people can be discriminated against on both race and class. Because it allows individuals to create, on the surface what are public schools, but they're privately run, so they don't have to follow all the rules of regular public schools, so they can therefore discriminate against black people, not by race, but by zip code. And the zip code is indicative of race and socioeconomics. So that is another way of how you could argue that class and race are linked, but it's done much more in a sophisticated way. They don't use race explicitly, they use the zip code.
So do you think Bernie's got a solution? if he's going to fix unemployment, which means he's going to make it where all black people got jobs.
I got some.
Did y'all know Bernie said that?
I'm
just kidding, I'm not sure he said that.
I got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay, so the whole idea behind him fixing unemployment, particularly for black people, people of color, racism goes away.
I have some thoughts. Okay, voter suppression, voter suppression, voter suppression. Okay, and also lack of belief that the system is even going to do anything, even if you do vote. And then not having people to vote for that are representative of the serious crises, the serious problems that face communities in poverty, that face minority communities. So first, you make voting really hard. As a voter organizer, I helped set up like voting poll locations, and very quickly I noticed when I was dropping off signs for my party, because I'm a Democratic Party precinct chair, which means I organize voters in my little area, my little zip code. Okay, I noticed that in, for example, my area, Greenspoint, if any of y'all are familiar, you know, we call it Guns Point, jokingly, lovingly. It's very low income. People are struggling. They many times don't have cars. They many times don't have access to a job, access to healthcare. It's definitely food deserts going on over there. But another thing that goes on there and all over, as I noticed going around the county setting up, was you would go to the luxury apartments to drop off the signs, vote here for this candidate. And the rich luxury apartments, they could literally walk downstairs to their apartment lobby, vote on the voting machine, and go back home and go to sleep or go to their nice job. Okay? Whereas in my neighborhood, it was an hour walk to the nearest poll, an hour. Okay? And you would have no bus lines. And many people, as I was knocking door to door to make sure people were registered to vote, you're talking about sicknesses, disabilities, lack of access to their own car, vehicle, or someone they even knew with a vehicle to even get to the polls. And then again, not having a candidate that they really think stands for them. So there is an entire system going on here that needs to be addressed, that needs to be changed. The two-party system needs to be totally rocked to the core. We need to have more voices. We need to have more access to all kinds of things. And one of those things is access to people that really represent you and being able to even have that ability to vote before the rich people just make it legal, okay?
Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
You know, I was at work and I had asked this question to people at my job. Now, I work at a assisted living facility. And it's owned and ran by Jews. They pay about $5,000–6,000.
7 acres or acre?
Maybe
Something
down
like
there
that.
next
Oh,
door.
okay.
And so I'm asking people that work there this question. So they're all looking at me crazy and asking me, what the hell are you talking about? You know, they just know they don't get paid fairly for the work that they do. The people that gets paid the most money in most instances are ones that do less work. They're usually the ones that get paid higher, but you can even see it there. And I was asking them things about segregation. We're still doing the same thing we did back then. We're still cleaning asses and you know, taking care of people. In the meantime, some of us are trying to become more educated or go to school to try to come out of that. But it's because they have so many classes. So we're considered the poor working class. So you can work hard. And so I'm going to school and my best friend friend at the phone, she said, I can't wait till you graduate. You're gonna take care of us. I said, social workers don't make money. I don't care if I don't ever have a job, I will stand up for what I believe in, and that's helping a human being, you know, especially in my community. I live on Martin Luther King, so you already know what that is. You know, and you probably know the brother. I went to his art exhibit, and I was going to be quiet at the library there, Mr. Noah, the rapper, who, okay, he had a nice exhibit set up because he walked from where homelessness from here, from Houston, Texas to California for homeless awareness, and the injustice because of how the system is done.
Well, this is a good segment into what we're going to talk about next, and that is wealth disparity and that type of thing. So, it's no secret that the rich is getting richer. The middle class is dwindling, which means that the poor is increasing. According to the 2014 U.S. Census, 14.5%, or that's over 45 million people, live in poverty. That's up from 11.3% just in 2000. On the other end of the spectrum, there was a report last week that the 62 richest billionaires own as much wealth as the poor half of the world's population. I was sitting with some friends at lunch talking about this, and they shared that with me. And that was probably the most depressing piece of information I've heard in a long time. 62. That is 62. Not 6,200. 62 of the richest billionaires own that much wealth. Yeah, right. Okay, so in terms of really trying to understand this and how to create these, take away this inequality, I know there's a lot of stuff that has to take place. But there are some things that we can consider. So I want the panel to consider it from this perspective. So to attempt to solve the issues of income inequality and wealth disparity, state your case for or against minimum wage increase, universal health care, and free public college education.
Yeah, I should be free college, should be free health care. I mean, other countries have it.
But let's state it from the standpoint of what does it do for rectifying inequality, wealth disparity? What can those things contribute to? Okay, all right. We'll start with you, Richard.
One thing that a number of other people have been advocating for is that the United States should look at or pay more attention to the Scandinavian countries, because they don't have, they have problems, but they don't have problems like we have problems. And what I mean by that is that the average Scandinavian resident, so when I say Scandinavia, I'm talking about Denmark, Finland, Sweden. People know where Scandinavia is. Okay. I know, but based on what I've read and studied,
you want to give us a geography lesson?
Well, I just want
No.
the average Scandinavian resident has a better quality of life than the average American. Although there are more Americans who are richer, we have more billionaires. But if you look at the average resident over there versus the average resident over here, it's like this. So what that suggests to me is that we can learn from them. Now, I've heard people say that that what they have is something that they can do because they are geographically smaller and they have fewer people. And so I've taken that into consideration, but I think we still have like the human capacity to do what they do, but do it, making an American version of that. And if we look at what they do, and we don't have to do everything that they do, I think we could have something like actual free healthcare, like what they have. We could have free education. What's the other thing that you said? Well, we could have better wages because we have empirical evidence that all those things exist and people do well. We have evidence of that. So my case is, yes, I am for universal health care, the Scandinavian kind. Yes, I am for better wages, the Scandinavian kind. And yes, I'm for education, Scandinavian kind.
Well, it sounds like we know where you bought a ticket.
No, we just need to clear it up.
All right, Amanda, what you?
I think that as long as there's systemic racism and discrimination and the plight for undocumented immigrants and them not having rights, and then thinking back to, this whole system exists because of the slavery oppression and suffering of others. Like, we don't even know who made our clothes or picked our food. It's come from somewhere else. It's come at the price of people's lives, people's suffering. So this whole system just needs to be start over. Let's do something different. You can raise the minimum wage all you want, but you have people fearing for their lives, literally losing their lives. I can tell you, I worked for 4 years in the emergency room here in Houston, and one time a mother who did not speak English was undocumented. They were even scared to come. Her daughter was unconscious. She wasn't breathing while they were eating at the dinner table. She puts her in my arm. We take her in. We work her up. She has a brain tumor that clearly could have been seen and treated. This was the kind of tumor that you would have seen symptoms for months ahead of time, but she's gone to the point of collapsing into her food, unconscious, not breathing, 14 years old, yet the parents are undocumented, scared to seek care. So yeah, we can talk all we want about health care for everyone. Well, what do you mean by that? And how are we going to fix all of these systemic problems so that, yes, we can get to the point where, yes, we put a maximum wage on this wealthy greed that's destroying civilization, our environment, our world, children, our people are suffering and dying so that they can have a yacht and $1 zillion clothing. Whatever it is. We can talk all day about people having access to health care, but there's so many problems that need to be sorted out, and they seem insurmountable and impossible, but it's important to have conversations like this. I love Dr. Penn. I saw him the other day at Humanism Houston. He called social media the great equalizer. Let's continue to use that while we still have the right to. Let's continue to make these spaces and conversations so that we do get to that point where, yes, people don't have to fear for their lives to seek care and risk so much damage and possibly death. Let's get to that point where citizens are seen as human beings and all lives really matter, like they like to say all lives matter. No, they don't. Only certain ones do. You're just saying that to raise the conversation about racial inequality and inequality. We have to get to this point where when we do have these things, that they are accessible for everyone.
Thanks, Amanda.
So my short answer is yes to all of them. I guess I would definitely identify as an anti-capitalist. My argument would be from a capitalist argument. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, I think the minimum wage rate was sort of half of the minimum worker wage rate to maintain. And to now, if we were to be at today, that means the minimum wage should be around $12 an hour. Almost now, just say raise it to $10 an hour. The only argument against that.
25. 25. Forget 15. That's some bullshit.
But I mean, at a minimum, so then I mean, just to kind of like continue to function and make people have a livable wage that's necessary. Also, back in the 60s, a high school education, K through 12, where public education is now, you can live off a high school education and probably make a middle income. Nowadays, it requires at minimum a bachelor's education. I have to differentiate, especially a person of color, who already salary was $60,000 a day. Right? As it relates to sort of healthcare, you can go to the corner of Rice at Maine and Cambridge and see a whole bunch of folk in hospital beds, and because once they run out of money, they kick them out, and you see them in the clubs right there. And the problem with that is, like other countries have sort of adopted universal health care. And what that looks like now. So I'm just saying the argument here from a capitalist point of view, it only makes sense to try to make these things for a person to be successful and achieve well-being in this country.
That is definitely from a capitalist perspective.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Did you?
I agree with
universal health care. I mean, come on. You know, we're the richest nation in the world. And people are worried about if they're going to be able to live and not predicated upon their financial resources. That is morally despicable. And as far as raising the minimum wage, I mean, come on now. Not only do we need to raise the minimum wage to probably 30, 35 hours an hour, but we need to also cap and have a maximum wage that may come in and hover around 50 to $55.
Man, you gonna have us all driving Cadillacs, brother?
I want you to have that. That's why
It's a Ford.
As long as it's all right.
You know, this entire discussion reminds me of something that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once put. He said quite simply that the rich could get richer and the poor could be taken care of if the rich would agree to become wealthier and richer at a slower pace, at a slower rate. What we're seeing now is quite simply criminal.
Yeah.
You know, it flows against every moral law of the universe. And the thing that makes me shudder, and as I want that Cadillac for you, I want peace for the wealthy and the elite. I don't believe that they're ever going to be able to secure peace as long as they're being governed by this consistent, constant chase for something that isn't even real.
Good.
It was the minimum wage, it was universal health care, and it was free college, right? When I
From
went
the
through
standpoint of income and wealth, income inequality, wealth disparity, that's what I want you to do.
So I went to college for journalism. I have a master's in journalism and studied the media at length. And one of the things that I am seeing as a media critic and media observer, and this is something that's not just relegated to Fox News. We all know that Fox News it's a joke to even call it journalism, really. It's not just Fox News. You can see this on CNN, you can see this on MSNBC, you can see this on the nightly news, is the demonization of the poor. People that ask for a very, very, very modest $15 minimum wage are demonized. They're moochers. You see the memes all over the internet, and you know, this person flips burgers and you know, the burger got dirty and this person wants $15 to do this. You see the demonization of people. You hear people that want universal health care called moochers, and you know, we work hard for our health care. Why should they get it for free? And you have people who actually, you know, espouse that, you know, education should be paid for. That's the way that we always have done. We live in a capitalist society. That's the way it's done in capitalism. And that people that ask for this are somehow bad people. That asking for the people that point out the absurdity of the fact that whether or not you stay alive and get proper health care is based on how much money you have. How, you know, pointing out how absurd that is somehow makes you evil. We have this, unfortunately, in this country and largely around the world, we have this idea that these people are moochers. We demonize them, we make them look bad, and it is supported, unfortunately, by people who are actually being exploited, the so-called middle class and the poor. We have ourselves demonizing ourselves. And that's why we have such a hard time getting these things through, is that we have convinced, especially the so-called middle class, which is, when you look at it, non-existent to begin with, but you have the so-called middle class that they want to reach they want so badly to reach for the top. They want to be the rich, not realizing that they're much closer to being the poor than they are to being the rich. And so they will demonize the poor because they're not one of us. In their minds, they want to be more like the rich. And as a result, we are stuck in this position where we don't have these things. We don't have universal health care, we don't have free college, and we don't have a livable minimum wage. We should have had these things a long time ago.
Well, I've heard that the middle class is being referred to as the buffer for the rich anyway. So that's why they want the middle class to kind of thrive, so that you can continue the ambition to be elitist or rich people, however you want to term it. So I want to, from the standpoint of the audience, and for those of you that might feel compelled to reveal your politics, you can abstain from this vote, all right? So from the standpoint of minimum wage increase, how many of y'all support that?
There you go.
You see,
Let me hide mine on that.
All right, so from the standpoint of universal health care, how many support that? And then free public college education, how many support that?
Both hands.
And how many people vote for Bernie? How many people vote for Bernie?
Okay, so we get a gist of the type of audience we have here, right? So we all are here talking about social justice. Sort of a strong relationship, I would think. So, all right, a couple more questions, and
Yeah.
then we're going to develop some things with a couple more questions that they need to get with the audience. Then we're going to get to you guys. So, next question. Homelessness is the most depressing economic justice issue we face in our society. It just makes me sick. Some cities see it as one of their most intractable problems. Is homelessness preventable? If not, if so? If not, if so?
So everybody looked at me, I saw you.
You first, me next.
So homelessness, they will not make it preventable. Have you all, and I'm sure the social workers heard of HMIS. So this is part of the reason why it won't be preventable, because HUD keeps changing the definition of homelessness. I was, 1 minute it was this, and then I come back from break and it was something else. Now we gotta help all the youth, you know. Now first we have to help people with disabilities. No, first it was the veterans. And if you look at how the system is designed here in Houston, it is say the Coalition for the Homeless, now the Way Home, aka, they've ended veteran homelessness. They're bullshit. They have not ended veteran homelessness. They'll say those are the ones that choose to stay on the street. However, they'll put all these credentials and criteria on them that and they'll tell you that they don't, but they do. So they won't prevent it. They don't have it designed to prevent homelessness. Families that are homeless, they have different, matter of fact, a grant was lost to help people keep their homes, where you may come up short because they have so many criteria on people that receive TANF. You have to work or you have to go search for a job. But then once you find a minimum wage job, they're gonna cut your food stamps off. So you gotta try to figure out how to feed your kids. So you just say, I'm not gonna work. So, or then you lose your place, and they took the grant away that was set up to help, so they can last another month or two. So guess what? Now they're gonna be in the homeless system all over again. And it's like recidivism. You know, it's a back and forth. You see the same people. And I remember even as an intern where I'm at an agency, and then I was homeless for a lot of years due to my addiction. 7 years, when I graduate in May, it'll be 7 years I've been clean off of crack cocaine. But it's so funny because when we go out to go talk to the homeless or count the homeless or go visit people, I know so many of them. And they try. But the way they have it set up, they don't have social workers available to help them. Life skills. Some of them been on the street so long, they need to start relearn what they need to do to live. And so what happens is they end up back out there. And then these agencies keep receiving all this funding. And it's very disgusting. So I've set up things where I'm trying to put policy into action dealing with the coordinated access. Now, I might not have a job when I get out of school, but I'm okay with that. A lady told me, Toinette, you have to build your houses first before you want to knock everybody down. But I don't see it like that coming from the other side of that street. I see it, I want to knock people's houses down with policy. So it'll be set up in a proper procedure to help assist people to not fall back into homelessness.
Anybody else?
I've been homeless 5 times in my life, twice due to domestic violence, and other times for other reasons, including pregnancy, loss of job, all kinds of things. I don't think it's preventable. I mean, you don't see it coming. And, you know, there's so many statistics and stuff that I can name. But could we do something about it eventually? There would have to be a big push for social change to say, hey, this is ridiculous. We have these huge empty buildings, they're perfectly suitable for homes, and why can't we let these people live here? Well, because it might inconvenience the rich person that owns it. Whatever the reason, there needs to be a serious conversation and move for change to say we're taking back what's being robbed from us, which is dignity of life. And we're not going to be quiet until something's done.
I don't want to sound defeatist or anything, but I'm going to say it straight up. I don't think that under capitalism there ever will be an end of
All right, that's it.
As long as we prioritize monetizing everything, as long as money is the bottom line, we will never get rid of homelessness. We have, as of January 2014, I think it was the number was 600,000 homeless in the United States. Probably more than that, most likely more than that by now. And yet we have millions of unoccupied homes. That means that we as a society, the power structures that we have made a conscious decision not to house the homeless. They have said we're not going to do it. There's no money in it, we're not going to do it. That is a conscious decision to have that many unoccupied homes compared to the number of homes that we have.
That's it.
Well said.
Fringe economy helps with homelessness too, even middle class. Fringe economy plays a big part of people losing their homes, even in the middle class. Yeah.
The shelters are always at capacity. I remember calling and calling and calling. They're always full. And the scary thing is, when you're in a domestic violence situation, you are looking for shelter to get out of a very dangerous place when you don't know if this person wants you dead. And they're always full. And I appreciate what you said. As long as money is the bottom line, this isn't going to change, and it has to. There's too many lives suffering and too many people even dying because of this.
And it's not new. The highest rate isn't amongst drug addicts and alcoholics. It's mental illness.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Okay, our final question for the panel. When the economic conditions of a society are indicated by so much uncertainty, joblessness, high debt, unsafe drinking water, not having food to eat, inadequate health care, disregard for the environment, I don't think you can give a true discussion of these conditions without critiquing that society's economic system. So I will solicit your critique of capitalism by posing this hypothetical. There's some capitalists in there about to shoot me.
Tell it.
If the majority of the citizenry recognize capitalism as an inadequate system, can you offer an alternative?
Any of us starts?
Pardon?
Well,
Let's assume that everybody in here agrees that capitalism is effed up.
What's the alternative?
So can you give us an alternative? That's what I'm asking you all.
I feel like the few systems that we have in place that might be considered socialist tend to work. I mean, let's look at, for instance, the library system. Sure, it's hurting now thanks to the expanse of the internet, but it's something that has existed and works at a more equal level. You know, being poor doesn't exclude you from going to the library for the most part. Of course, there's library cards or something like that, but by itself, you don't need money to go to a library. You don't need money to essentially, you know, get mail. It seems like socialist principles tend to work well even in the midst of a capitalist society, hampered by the capitalism, of course. And I don't want to make it just like clear that I think that socialism is, you know, by itself. I think the answer is, in reality, is something that maybe we have not come up with yet, but I think socialism might be a step in the right direction, is maybe a more accurate way of saying, based on what we have that is socialist and how successful they are.
Okay.
So for me, right, I would agree that capitalism sort of has been oppressive to those who are workers, but it's been more oppressive to those who are not working, right? Who are those who may be disabled, who are outside of the system, because poverty is one of the chief problems, right? So the only answer, I guess, to be speculative at this point, is to talk about ways in which we enable employers or persons to be able to say no, not be a part of the working system and still being able to survive.
Yes.
Those who are not able to work. That's theoretical. How do we create a system with persons who are not able to work, or those who reject the authority system and are able to say no, but still able to survive? When we come up with an answer to that, I think we'll get closer to trying to resolve the problems.
Okay.
A little bit off what he said, I think if we redefine how we think, their poverty is real. But I can sit here and say I'm poor, but I have a roof over my head and I have food in my mouth. So when I go home, it's in a low income area. But when I pull up, I say, this is my condo. If y'all see our Mercedes is parking in the parking lot. It's a 2003 Grand Prix. So mentally, the way society has told us, okay, you're poor because you don't make this amount of money, to not get that light and say, I'm stuck here, I'm poor, so I got to try to come up instead of thinking, instead of doing something to try to sustain a better life, and not so much thinking as, oh, I'm poor, what am I going to do? So it was just kind of piggybacking off of what the gentleman said right here.
Any other alternative?
I don't know a lot about.
Jones had his hand
Oh,
up.
go ahead.
I'm not sure if I'm really offering an alternative to capitalism. I don't believe that within this nation, as far as we've gone with this capitalist monster, that the powers that be would ever relinquish it. So I think that if we're going to have this discussion, we may need to move it into sort of a real world type of situation. And instead of indoctrinating ourselves by saying that the working class and the poor need to start thinking about this thing differently, I think that we need a humongous dose of, number one, love, and number two, reorientation for the wealthy and the elite. Sort of a revamping of Keynesian economics that would explain to them that as long as they are, and of course we would have to address them in a way that is financially advantageous for them, and get them to understand that as long as you are hoarding all of this money and not employing those people who are going to buy your goods, you are lessening your financial profit. That may be the only way to get them to understand, quite simply, that if you give some, you get much more back in return. Outside of that, they're not going to even listen to you.
I don't know a lot about economics, but I do know that it does need to change, and there has to be a better way than existing off the backs of child slavery and exploitation in other countries than this country. There has to be a better way than immigrants being exploited and used and then demonized and scared for their lives to even go outside their homes. At this time, there's something called ICE raids going on. They literally can show up to their places where they exist, where they live, homes, break down their doors, take them and deport them, okay? This is happening now. In this country, it's happening in Texas, Georgia, and it's happening all over the place. In the country, wherever undocumented immigrants are, there has to be something that says we don't have to destroy the environment just so someone can have their golden castle while you have people living in the streets and starving. I think the whole system needs to be burned to the ground, quite frankly, and that's radical, and that people think I'm crazy. Fine, think I'm crazy, but I'm angry because I'm tired of the people that I put in body bags when I was working in the emergency room from things that were very preventable. I'm tired of hearing about people dying and starving and suffering, and us being disillusioned by our distractions from seeing that if we all stood up and said no, it could stop.
Oh, there you go.
I'd like to offer that a major alternative would be for each one of you all to evaluate what it would do for our economy and our democracy if we had more worker-owned cooperatives. So how many of you all are not familiar with worker-owned cooperatives? So when I'm using that term, it's another language to you. How many of you all are in that category?
I didn't understand what you said.
Worker-owned cooperatives.
Oh, yeah.
Worker-owned cooperatives. Okay, so if you're familiar with it, give it some real consideration. And I think you'll see that that might be a real alternative to the way our capitalism works.
Yeah, but none of them ever work on this split.
I differ with you on that. Okay, we're gonna get, we're gonna open the floor.
I'm open for example.
There's several in all.
It actually is working.
In terms of a work-on cooperative that works,
The best one that I know of is Mondragon in Spain.
right, that's the.
Or there's one in Red Factory.
That's the best example to give.
Really?
So, and I
But
can,
Mondragon has been around.
Yeah,
for
really,
how many
and they pay better.
yes, many years.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna open it up for Q&A. So we have right at 12, 13 minutes. And we're going to go here, 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 then there, and then hold it right here.
That should do it.
All right, let's go.
Well, first off, I think this is really great that we had this discussion because, first off, people were talking about capitalism. You know, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have this, the term itself would not come up. We may talk about capitalism, but not use the word. Two, we're talking about alternative. And I have a shameless plug, I have a show called Socialist Visions. And the reason why I call it Socialist Visions is because we have lost a vision for something different. I think that Bernie's campaign.
What's your question?
I'm answering it.
All right.
I'm trying to answer what he's saying. Oh, did I just ask the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, question, straight to the point. You're here to hear us talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to the point. No, I'm sorry. All right. So, but my question is then, do you think when Bernie says something about, it's not about just me, it's about us, what we're going to do you think that that's something different, a different direction in terms of the political campaign or the political U.S. presidential campaign? Is that he's saying we need a political revolution, and it's not just about him that we need to do it. He's not saying I'm going to do it, but that we're going to do it.
It would be great and new if he actually meant it. We heard that rhetoric before, so now if he stays, and I believe that he means that, him staying the course and actually driving through with that would be something that was unprecedented within this national politics over the last several decades.
Okay.
It needs to be made clear. I've said this before, maybe not here, but every political season, there is that candidate that is held up by so many people as being the magic bullet and the magic answer that's going to solve all our problems. And this candidate has said something that candidates have never said before, and it's never true. There's always a candidate every election season, every election cycle that says this stuff. What Bernie has said is not stuff. You know, maybe he has said some unique things, maybe regarding race. But as far as we need to do this, not just but we've heard that rhetoric before. We're not going to get a magic bullet answer from a politician. It's going to take the people.
Right.
All right, let's get
That's his point. That's his point.
And then,
That Sanders is.
That's aimed at the people that think that Sanders is the answer.
all right, let's try to get a few more questions here.
One thing I haven't heard anybody talk about was the amount of money that's spent on so-called defense, which is basically U.S. hegemony, killing people of color all over the world. And if we didn't spend so much money on that, we'd have plenty of money for universal health care, free college for everybody, and a fair and living wage. So what is your feeling on the amount of money that we're spending, 51 cents of every dollar, that goes to killing people of color all over the world?
That's
The
ridiculous.
defense industry has tremendous lobbyists. And so that's why when bills are passed, spending bills are passed, they have enough Democrats as well as Republicans to support them. Another thing that I've heard is that what also helps the defense industry is that you have different sectors of the defense industry all over the country. And so they can go to basically any lawmaker from any state and say, hey, if you don't support this, you're going to lose jobs. So it's an industry that's not concentrated in a particular region. Because we have some lawmakers who are like, well, I'm about corn, they're about cars. So you come to me if you want to talk about corn. But in the case of the defense industry, there's something in every single state related to the defense industry.
And I think we also have to have an honest conversation about power within this political discourse, right? I mean, until those in power really want to upturn sort of contractor toward defense, it's not going to happen. I mean, think about it right now. I mean, Bernie Sanders has done a great job. I mean, he's spurring a lot of inspiration around the country, young folk in particular. So the truth about it is, people on the political spectrum are saying he doesn't have a chance because people with the money, the oligarchs, who really control the election, ultimately they're going to be backing those who they're embedded with. I mean, but not literally. Clinton has most of those who will power back. So we have to talk about the power dynamics at play in politics. And so those who, or majority of Republican leaders, or those who are on those committees, I mean, it's great for all of us to have these ideas. Obama was he said, yes, we can. So Bernie's not the first one. But I think until we really get a chance to kind of change what's going on in sort of the power nature of the power is these things won't really change that much.
Right, okay. Let the lady right. She's not different.
This one here.
Yeah.
You have a question? Okay.
This one.
I had a question.
Okay, all right.
So we've seen like people like Stacey Dash and other traders talk about respectability politics, which is the most disgusting thing in the world. Can you tell us how exactly that really hurts the mindset of economic justice? Like just the concept of respectability politics, how it's hurting economic justice.
I think it's the false notion that if I behave and comport myself according to the particular status quo ideas of how I should be, then I can narrow the gap between wealth and inequality. We're talking about wealth here, right? It's saying if I have the right income, I have the right education, or I have the equal qualifications, then everything else will go away. So these are old arguments that's been around for a while. It's not about race, it's about this class. And really to associate, instead of this class, it's about behaving in a certain way. But when we look about, when we talk about, we look at wealth inequality, we see that the problem is much more deeper than just behaving a certain way or having a certain look. It goes into sort of generations of sort of the wages and poor opportunities for education that has to be resolved systemically, and not just on an individual basis.
Okay, let's get another one. Austin.
Very great. All right. I have a question about this. This might be moving the conversation in a different way. I think Dr. Jones mentioned this. The fact that there are so many people that if they just realize that they have power, I mean, we talk about grassroots movements, but I'm a person that loves to look at, you know, black economics and really likes to read a lot about this. And I see certain movements like Maggie Anderson. She did this, what's called, it was called the Ebony Experiment. I love that book. And she has a program where she's going around promoting nationally, I'm not sure internationally, for people to buy from more black businesses. I see local collectives. I have friends that are in Melanated Men of Action that are working in Third Ward. What do you think about these grassroots movements? Because I don't think, when I think of income inequality, there's the money issue, but then there's the fact that you have resources. If you can depend on your own people in your community, money is not really an issue. You just have to have the resources. I mean, it's a part of the issue, but what do you think about these grassroots movements that are taking back the power? Like, you know what, let's look at our own resources, look what we all have, and really take our power back. What do you think about those movements?
Actually, I'm with the group that's actually sort of co-signed with what the Andersons did when they spent an entire year patronizing black businesses exclusively. We haven't gone that far. We're not just, because one of the things that you realize when you attempt to do what she did is that you get frustrated like she did, because you find out the businesses that you thought were black owned aren't, and the ones that you need do not exist. But I do agree with her a lot when she says that we should all think about how we should be more committed to promoting and creating black businesses and spending more money there. Because one of the things that she says again and again is that the black dollar spends the least amount of time in the black community. In other communities, like the Jewish community, the Hispanic community, the dollar will circulate for several days, but when it comes to the black American community, it doesn't even last a day. Sometimes maybe just a minute. So, I mean, to go back to your point, I think that we do have the ability and the capacity to do things on our own to address like wealth disparity by changing some of our attitudes about black businesses. Because one thing that she ran into is that there was a very nice, probably tell me something you already know. There was a very nice grocery store, and it was top notch.
I love that
and
store.
Nobody would go to it.
And it was excellent.
It was excellent, and no one would go. And she like broke down and cried because the man had to basically liquidate and sell everything. And he did. The way they look at it, they did everything that they could do to bring business to it. They went on the radio. They offered free food, and still people weren't coming.
And the people were saying that, oh, he had just stuck in there longer. And like she at church almost cussed the lady out. Was like, no, it's because people like you didn't go and support him when I told you to.
Or another problem is that in one case, if I remember correctly, she said that I guess it was so good they didn't think it was black.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's it. One more question.
Yeah. So I wanted to piggyback to your statement about free things. And to me, those things that were mentioned are adult things. To me personally, we're forgetting the impact of child. Because to me, I wanted to ask, what do you think about, I like free preschool. That would alleviate the problem that most families have to allow them to be able to have a job, allow them to go to school. The fact that we only limit it to college, you can't get there if you can't even take care of your kids.
Right.
You can give someone free college, but if they can't go to college because they have to take care of their kids or pay so much that it's not feasible. But the other thing I want to say is food insecurity for children in general. This is to me a major problem. And I wanted to ask, what do you think my opinion is? Free lunch, free breakfast, and a snack for dinner, then we know for a fact that public school is making sure the kids food's available. What do you think about that?
Let's get to the panel. Someone give me a...
So they have free lunch.
Yeah, not everywhere, but yeah.
But the thing about it is, the shit you put in your body that they give you in that free lunch at that school is not healthy. My child takes her lunch to school.
Yeah.
I don't let her eat because it wasn't when I was in school. We had good food. Now it's pre-packaged, and because I went to the school to eat with her because I got to sign and fill out the paper for the free lunch. And I was like, what is this? It's not healthy. So with the taxpayers for schools in certain districts, they need to give some of that money to urban communities for the schools because they don't need it, but they won't when they have all the better technology. So it's free education, but what level of education are our children getting? And it's the better schools getting most of the taxpayer money because we don't have businesses in our communities that going to pay for these schools to have better education. And I know we're not on this subject, but to talk about what that young man said, I agree with you. And I think it's up to us to have to educate one another to spend money with the black community because guess what? Even as broke as I am, I'm able to put my dollar somewhere and I do it with my jewelry from a sister that makes jewelry and sells jewelry. That's because that's all I can afford right now. If it was a grocery store, I don't know if I could afford it, but I would try, because I'm more conscious than I was before. So yeah, we need that taxpayer money from out of those rich communities.
Well, I would have more ideas. He only said to keep it small. I have a lot of ideas about how much I hate capitalism.
All right, we're going to keep it, we're going to have to end it right here. So let's give our panel big I'm sure we have opportunity in the hallways for other questions, conversations. So let's continue to talk about this.